Hello, everybody. How are we doing? Good, good. Put your hands together again for Hannah one more time. I really appreciated you sharing earlier, too, about what you're going through this week, Hannah. And I think oftentimes it can be scary to be vulnerable like that, especially in front of a room full of people. But that really kind of ties into what I'm going to say. And so I appreciate that honesty and being able to say, hey, I'm struggling, but I'm trying to pull the light out today. That's something that I'm practicing to do as well. So yes, I'm Rachel. I am a co-founder of the Diatribe, as was mentioned earlier. So we are especially thankful to you all for being one of our sponsors again this year for our event, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Today I'm talking about the importance of listening to and learning from our young people, as that's something that I practice every day in my work with the Diatribe, and I see the importance of it and the value in it for others as well. So I'd like to share a lot about the work that we do in the schools, share some stories with you, and at the end, possibly if there's time for a poem, I may share a poem with you again. First, I would actually like to share a poem by a student. So one of the readings that we had this morning was a poem from Regina. The first line in that poem really blew me away. Of love isn't about swallowing a part of myself so that you can fit better. And this student, she's a 16-year-old who we've been working with for 2 years already and has blown me away since day one as a 14-year-old with the insight and the beautiful poetry that she has written in the last couple of years. And so I want to share this poem that she also has written. To the one clinging to a place that used to make them feel safe, I see you and I am here. An empty cathedral of promises, that is where I found you. There was no label, no expectation, except that I could be safe here. We were supposed to be safe here. The organ carved cords into our bones, branding us to know who we belong to. Pews held aching bodies, too afraid to hold hands, to simply sit too close. Stony faces staring down on us. We couldn't tell the statues from our parents. Whispers too loud here. We could only hope not to be caught finding hymns in one another. Hope that for just once, no one was watching the back seats in the church van, the farthest couches in youth group. We were merely lambs, not yet lions. How could they say that safety was no longer promised to us? That the love was now made conditional? A burning church. That is where I lost you. She is an extremely powerful writer and thinker in general, not just for her age. And I'm probably a little bit biased because I see my story in hers. I see a lot of my own experiences and struggles, but I was not able to put it in those words yet at that age, what I was struggling with to come out within the church and all the burdens that came with that. It wasn't until I was much older, until I was 19, that I, found the courage to be myself, to speak about who I was, to share my voice in writing in that way. But I think it's so important to be able to give young people that space to say those things. I know that for a long time, I felt very voiceless and unheard as a young person. How many of you as a young person felt like your voice didn't really matter or that the adults in your life didn't really care what you had to say? I think especially in the world today, it's a noisy place now. We're getting talked at from all different angles. We're constantly on social media and being bombarded with these things, and it can feel really easy to get lost in all of that noise. And I think what's really important is if we want young people to open up and share with us, we have to set that stage of mutual trust and respect. Like I said, I probably would have shared more of my story, been more open and honest with myself and others if that had been the example, if I had been given some sort of platform, even a conversation with an adult where I felt safe. There's a big difference between being listened to and being spied on. My mom definitely liked to find things out about my life by prying and searching. So if you don't want someone to write a poem about you in that way, I have a poem about my mom. And it's not the happiest of pieces because I definitely felt shut out from her and that I couldn't talk to her. So I think it's really important to show those young people in our lives, whoever that might be in your life, that your love will always be there, that your support will never waver. We have to show them that we understand because a lot of times I think adults can discount and discredit young people's voices because they're inexperienced or uneducated. And there's this sense that, it was even said in the group this morning when we were talking, there's a sense that, oh, I've been around longer than you, I know better than you. And we need to kind of check ourselves in that and realize that we can actually learn a lot from young people and not discredit the things that they have to say. And I think in validating their experiences and what they've been through, letting them know that what they're going through matters, that their voice matters, their story matters, every pain and triumph, their questions, their ideas, their fears, all of it is incredibly significant and it matters. And showing these young people in our lives that they have that support, that they have someone who is listening, that actually cares what they are going through, can do wonders for self-esteem and confidence as they're moving through the world. And I think about how, as a young person, particularly at ages of 13 to 17, so much is going on in young people's lives. You're learning how you fit in your family, in your community, in society as a whole. And you're also going through an incredible amount of changes and tough issues at school. There are so many things going on in young people's lives that we're aware of on the periphery, but maybe not realize those young people that are in our lives are experiencing these things too. So I have a few statistics that I don't want, are not meant to scare or shock you or anything like that, but just some things that young people are going through these days, and to think about the young people in your own life and how to maybe start having conversations with them. But there's a percentage, some of these are from 2015 and 2017, but the percentage of Michigan high schoolers who have had sex is 36%, 3% having sex before the age of 13, 9% report having sex with 4 or more partners, 22 of high schoolers reported using drugs or alcohol before having sex. 8% report experiencing physical dating violence and being hit or injured in the past 12 months before the survey. 12% reported being physically forced to kiss, touch, or have sex. 8% reported being physically forced to have sex when they did not want to. 26% of students reported being bullied at school. 19% reported being bullied online. 20% reported being in a physical fight 1 or more times in the last 12 months. 6% reported not going to school because they felt unsafe either at school or on their way to or from school. In 2017, 37% of people ages 12 to 17 reported feeling sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row. 21% reported seriously attempting suicide in the previous 12 months, and 3% reported attempting suicide in the previous 12 months. And those are all issues and more that we don't see and might not even see in the people in our own lives because they're things that we're conditioned and taught not to talk about. Growing up, I know that mental health was not something that was talked about in my home. It was seen as a spiritual inadequacy. If you were sad, it was because you were far away from God. And more, I am encouraged by seeing young people talking about their mental health, talking about the importance of therapy, sharing on Facebook and other social media what they learned from their therapist in the last week. And that encourages me so much because for so long, I think that was something that was hidden and seen as shameful, when really, if we all can be honest and say that we're struggling, it opens that door so much to be able to help one another, reach out to one another, and lift one another up. And these face-to-face conversations that are diminishing in these times of social media and other forms of typing and communication through text, we're losing that face-to-face value a lot of times. And that is showing up in young people also reporting feelings of isolation and social anxiety. So for all of these reasons, self-expression is extremely important. So I am someone with working with the diatribe, believe in the power of poetry to be able to help young people express themselves and what they're going through. But I think that's something that even in your everyday lives, with the young people in your lives, that you can empower them, not just through self-expression and writing, but having those conversations with those people. Our organization believes that before we can expect our students to open up and be honest with us, that we have to open that door and set that tone of being willing to share what we're going through. This is why we start all of our programming with an assembly. where all of us share our own stories. There's 4 or 5 of us that each do assemblies, sharing things that we went through as young people, things that we struggle with, things that we continue to struggle with. And that is setting the tone for them to be able to open up and then share their story. And I think that's true for all of us, that when we're having conversations, if we say, hey, this is what I am struggling with right now, these are my hopes, these are my dreams, then how much more comfortable those young people in our lives will be to share those things back with us. So just some examples I wanted to share from the work that we do, since you all are sponsors of our work. It's been incredible to be in so many different schools. The Diatribe is in 9 schools right now doing 6 weeks of programming. And we're all across the board in all different kinds of schools. We are in Discovery Elementary School working with 5th graders for the first time. We are in several middle schools. We are in alternative high schools. And it's incredible to see this wide range and all these young people from these different demographics and how many of them are going through the same things, how many of them are going through extremely difficult things that I couldn't imagine. They're standing up and talking about these difficult things that they're going through. They're breaking the silence in their own lives and empowering others to do the same. And one thing that comes to mind is we were in a middle school, and I've really realized just how soon we start to shut ourselves off, the difference between middle schoolers and high schoolers and what they're willing to talk about in their participation is so much more willing to be open. And by the time that young people are in high school, they've kind of already built these walls and aren't as willing to talk about these things. And I remember being in a middle school, and we had done a whole school assembly in 2 halves. And so about half of the school was in the room at one time. And we opened up the floor at the end of our assembly and allowed some of the students to come up and share their poems and what they were going through. And one young man stood up in front of all of his classmates and began speaking about what was going on in his home life and began speaking about sexual abuse that he was experiencing from an uncle. And I can't imagine the amount of bravery it took for him to share that with his peers in middle school. Middle school is a terrifying place. And all of his students surrounded him and hugged him and supported him and patted his back and cried with him. And the faculty was able to intervene in the home and remove the uncle from the home. And that was one of the most powerful things that I saw from young people. I've seen students come out to their schools and reading poems about being queer and finding themselves and crying in front of their peers and sharing their experience and their struggle and having other kids raise their hand and say, me too, and see that support and how that one person standing up encouraged all of these others to stand up and say, I see you, I relate to you, maybe I'm not going to treat you the same way that I did before. I have seen students write poems about race. One student in Northview Middle School, a middle schooler, biracial middle schooler in a school that was predominantly white, share her poem about being called an Oreo and telling her peers to stop treating her the way that they were treating her, and the amount of courage it took to stand up and say, this is who I am, this is how I see myself, I'm not letting you all define me, was incredibly powerful. Just countless stories of students writing about the gentrification happening in their neighborhoods, the way that their neighborhoods are changing, seeing those students go into their neighborhood association and share these poems with their neighborhood association, seeing young people in speaking to boards of education and saying, the teachers in my classroom are invalidating me and my experience, and this is what you need to do as teachers to be responsible and to make sure that your classroom is a safe space. And it's been incredible to see these young people rising up and taking ownership of their story and their voices. And one student in particular I am thinking of, in the last week, we've been talking about the importance of breaking the cycle of violence. So we have been watching a poem by Rudy Francisco, which I encourage all of you to look up. Also, he is going to be at our event on November 23rd, the Grand Showcase. There's a poem by Rudy Francisco called Rifle, and it's about an artist in Mexico that convinced the Mexican government to take all of the guns that they'd been confiscating and breaking down and turning into other weapons for their military, and he convinced them to give the weapons to him. And he broke them down and it ended up turning them into musical instruments. So the poem is about unlearning what you've been trained to do and how if a rifle can learn to be a violin, then we can take these parts of ourselves that have been taught violence and reactionary responses to things, and then learn love. So we were talking about that, and I was blown away by so many of the students' responses of how to break that cycle of violence. And we started by asking a question, which was, how many of you were taught growing up, and I'll ask you all here, how many of you all were taught growing up that when someone hits you, you hit them back? So quite a few here. And then we asked them, and in this classroom, I believe it was Crossroads Alternative High School in Kentwood. We asked that question, almost every single hand went up. We then asked, how many of you know someone, a family member or a friend who has been to jail? And again, almost all of the hands went up. And we asked them, why do you think that we are so comfortable to react in a way that has dire consequences for the rest of our lives? And some of these responses blew me away. One student raised her hand and said, our fists don't stutter. And I was like, that is a poem. She went on to say, our fists don't stutter, but we can relearn. We can teach our fists. We can teach our minds. We can teach our bodies to react in different ways. We can use our words. And just what she was saying to the class was a poem in itself. And I was like, you need to write everything you said down right now. And I was blown away by all of these answers of ways that they wanted to raise their children, things that they wanted to do to change in their lives, to work on self-control. And there was one student at 54th Street Academy, which is also an alternative program. The same question was asked, how can you break cycles of violence in your life? And he raised his hand and he said, I don't think you can. You can't stop instinct. And that was something we had been talking about, how when an action is repeated, when that's what you're learning from your parents, it often becomes instinct. And one thing that we always say when we're in classrooms is that there is no wrong answer. It isn't math class. We're talking about race and gender. We're talking about gentrification and representation. We're talking about violence and trauma. So sometimes we don't always agree with what our students say, but we never invalidate it. So we listen to him. We let him speak his truth. And while it was disappointing to hear someone say, I can't break this cycle, it's not possible, I saw his truth in that. And we listened to other students still offer their ideas, and we offered our own ideas of how to do that. But it was a moment where I really felt like I saw that young person and heard him, even though I had a different idea and was resistant to that and wanted to say, but you can change your circumstances. But I think if I had done that, what happened later would not have happened. And that was that after the students left the room, he came back into the room and was kind of worked up. And he was like, well, we had to have this conversation. Now I can't go to 6th hour. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I just keep thinking about this and how hard it is to not fight. And I have court on Tuesday because I got in a fight a couple of weeks ago. And I have to go to court for disorderly fighting on Tuesday morning. And he shared that with me, and it opened the opportunity for me to say, have you thought about what you're going to say to this judge? And he said, no. And I said, if you're given an opportunity to speak, writing this prompt, how to break the cycle of violence in your life, even if the answer is you don't know how, but that it's something that you're thinking about. If you can answer that prompt of I'm learning that, or I'm learning to, and finish those prompts and tell that judge that you don't want to be a part of this system, that you want to be a part of the change. You want to volunteer with our organization. Fable volunteered to go to the court with him and stand there as a representative with him. And I keep thinking about that, and it's still coming up this Tuesday, and it's been on my mind all week. And I can't help but think that he probably would not have come back into the room if we hadn't listened or we had shut him down when he had said that he didn't know how to break the cycle of violence. And I think about how important it is to listen and just what listening can do, even if we feel that we have a better answer. And then now I just want to share a few examples of young people in the world that are doing incredible things that I think we all can learn from, in addition to those young people in our own lives that I hope that you are all listening to and learning from as well. One such young person here is Marley Diaz. She's a 14-year-old activist and feminist, and she launched a campaign with the Twitter hashtag 1000 Black Girl Books in 2015 when she was only in 6th grade. So the hashtag was born out of her. As a reader, she was not seeing any characters that looked like her in books, no main characters that were young Black women. And that's what she wanted to see. And the book drive resulted in more than 11,000 books cataloged with Black female protagonists and counting. Marley also wrote a book herself called Marley Diaz Gets It Done, and So Can You. And that is a guide to positive change through activism. Then there is Shoota's cat, Martinez, and he is an environmental activist who spoke at the young 3 times by the age of 15, urging leaders to take action against climate change. So he is actually one of 21 other people his age that are plaintiffs in a lawsuit against the federal government, arguing that ignoring climate change means they are denying the constitutional right to life, liberty, and property. And this was something that we talked about in the group ahead of time also, of how important it is to young people that they have a world to live in when they grow up. Shock there. But yes, that's incredibly important. I think that's a huge place where we can learn and say, yes, we need to make these changes. Yes, we need to ensure that there is a world for you. Then there was a 10-year-old, this one goes back a little bit, 10-year-old Samantha Smith eased Cold War tensions between Russia and the US with a single letter, and she became America's youngest ambassador. Bana al-Abed, at 7 years old, documented her life in war-torn Syria on Twitter. And that's I think she had help from her mother as well as a 7-year-old on Twitter. But sharing her voice and her perspective and photos from her everyday life that changed the world and really opened up eyes around the world to what was happening there. Sisters Malati and Isabel Wisden of Rwanda were only 10 and 12 years old when they started a course of activism that drastically decreased the global use of single-use plastics. So I see these young people doing these huge things, doing these important things, and I know that in order to do those things, they have to have been encouraged at some point. Either that or they fought tooth and nail until someone listened. And I think that we can all do ourselves and do young people a service if we can maybe step back sometimes. Maybe we don't need to have the last word. Maybe we don't have to take every moment as a teachable moment. Maybe those are some moments where we can learn, where they can teach us something. That's something that I'm learning every day in my work with young people and that I am hoping to continue. And I think that if we continue to do that, that there really will be a bright future, that we'll see more and more young people standing up and making change and working for the world that they want to see. So I think I do have a little bit of time, and I would like to share a poem before I go. So this poem is one that I think of when I look back at my younger days. I can learn from myself and the way that I express myself. So this poem is called Rambo Renegades. And as a young person, I didn't feel like I had an example of a strong woman in my life. And so for a long time, I was a tomboy and wanted to be a boy because I thought that girls couldn't be strong. And so I look back at a lot of the misguided beliefs that I had was that when I was younger, but also just how proudly I was myself without caring, running around, playing outside, dressing like a boy, and really feeling like myself as a child, and then getting into middle and high school and feeling like I had to conform and change, and how my mindset hardened and how I became less open. But this poem is looking at that journey and how I have come into myself as a woman, and now how I hope to be that example for young women today. So this is that poem. Bless you. When I was young, I was proud of the bruises on my legs, of the dirt stains on my plain white t-shirts. When I was young, I was so damn proud of that denim vest I bought from Target with my own money, the closest I could get to that outsider's look. When I was young, I wanted to be a greaser, a Rambo renegade, a street rat with a heart of gold. When I was young, my brother used to run inside yelling, "Mom, Rachel's playing Aladdin again and she's not wearing a shirt under her vest." When I was young, I used to draw pictures of shirtless men with muscular, contoured chests. When I was young, I wanted to be a boy because I wanted to be strong, and I thought only boys could be strong. When I was young, my brother used to hold me down, and sometimes the look in his eye would scare me. Sometimes I can still feel him holding my biceps down with his knees, hear his words from between gritted teeth, "Open your mouth." And when I finally did, he spit. When I was young, I went to the gym with my mother one day. And I thought that when I got home, I'd have big muscles, that I'd be stronger than my brother, and I couldn't wait to see the look on his face. When we got to the gym, I went straight for the free weights. I stood at the rack in front of the mirror and watched my grin fade as I realized that only the smallest ones weren't too heavy for me. And after only a few badly formed curls, even those were too much for me. And I quickly realized that changing your body isn't done quite so easily. And on the car ride home, I cried with my face to the window and couldn't quite put a name to what I was feeling. When I was young, I wanted to be a boy because I wanted to have a girlfriend. And when I realized that in my world that wasn't a possibility, I cried with my face in my pillow and couldn't quite put a name to what I was feeling. And I was young, younger than 10, the first time I cut myself on purpose. And I could stand up here right now and show you all the scars that I gave to myself when I thought that in order to be seen as strong, you had to prove that you'd been through battle. But I'd been through battle. I just wanted the evidence to be physical, my toughness to be visible. But isn't it funny how really these scars just made me look weak, like I needed someone to save me. And maybe I just needed someone to save me from the misguided belief that strength is tied to masculinity, that masculinity is tied to maleness. Because now that I'm older, I can understand the hierarchy. Now that I'm older, I can address my own misogyny. Now that I'm older, I love being a woman. I love being a woman that loves other women. Now that I'm older, I can finally put a name to all of those confused feelings because I've realized that all I've ever wanted was the freedom to be me. Now that I'm older, I can claim my liberty. Now that I'm older, I don't want to be strong in order to hold my brother down. I don't want to hold any of my brothers down. I just want us to stand hand in hand, and maybe together we can show the next generation of young women that they can be whatever they want to be, that there is a strength inside of them, that the world is waiting to see that they are Rambo renegades and they don't have to change a thing. Thank you.